The grand neon-lit ballroom of the Mandarin Oriental in New York was filled with a suffocating cloud of wealth, arrogance, and blinding flashbulbs. It was the 5th anniversary gala of Stark Nexus, the fastest-growing artificial intelligence conglomerate in the world, valued at a staggering $50 billion. Everyone who was anyone in the tech and venture capital world was there, dressed in multi-thousand-dollar tuxedos and flowing silk gowns, sipping premium champagne under the massive crystal chandeliers. I was standing near the back of the VIP tech pavilion, wearing the heavy, unattractive, oversized gray utility jacket of the company's ground-level hardware maintenance crew. A heavy, leather tool belt was slung over my hip, and my fingers were slightly stained with thermal paste and carbon dust. To the hundreds of high society elites walking past me, I was completely invisible. I was just a nameless, faceless tech maid, hired to fix broken servers and clean dust filters while the real gods of industry celebrated. Suddenly, a sharp, loud mechanical crash cut straight through the classical violin music. A heavy crystal glass of red wine was deliberately slammed against the tech console right next to my hand, splashing the dark, staining liquid across my work jacket and pouring straight into the delicate circuits of $1 million mainframe server prototype I was working on. "Look at what you've done, you clumsy, useless peasant," a sharp, painfully familiar voice boomed across the pavilion, instantly drawing the attention of dozens of nearby journalists and billionaires. My heart didn't just stop. It felt like it was violently ripped out of my chest. I slowly lifted my head, wiping a stray drop of red wine from my cheek. Standing directly in front of me was Julian Stark, the CEO of Stark Nexus, the man who had been my fiancé for 3 long years, the man I had loved with every fiber of my soul. But he wasn't looking at me with the eyes of a lover. His face was twisted into an expression of pure, unadulterated, elitist contempt. Beside him stood Alyssa Mercer, the heavily airbrushed, diamond-dripping daughter of the city's largest venture capital tycoon. She was leaning against Julian's arm, looking at my stained work uniform with a cruel, mocking sneer that showed she viewed me as nothing more than a piece of dirt beneath her expensive designer heels. "Julian, darling," Alyssa scoffed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and immense condescension, waving her manicured hand in front of her nose, as if I emitted a foul odor. "Is this the level of trash you employ at your flagship headquarters? I thought Stark Nexus was an elite, cutting-edge establishment. Why is this dirty, low-level server maid lingering around the VIP pavilion, ruining our anniversary dinner? She looks absolutely disgusting." Julian adjusted his custom-tailored silk tuxedo, his eyes cold, empty, and completely devoid of any human remorse as he stared down at me. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills, and slapped them violently against my chest, letting the money scatter across the wet, stained floor. "Clean up this mess, Elena, and then get your pathetic things out of my building," Julian announced, his voice booming across the grand ballroom so loudly it bounced off the glass walls. "You are officially fired, and our engagement is permanently over. Look at you. You've been a low-grade tech support girl for 3 years, earning a miserable minimum wage, wearing rags, and living in a cramped apartment. I am the face of the global AI revolution. I belong at the very top of the Forbes list, and frankly, a nameless, penniless orphan like you, is a massive stain on my corporate branding and my future social status. Before I could even speak, the company's regional vice president came running over, bowing deeply to Julian and Alyssa. "Mr. Stark, Miss Mercer, I am so incredibly sorry. Elena, strip off your security clearance badge and leave the premises immediately. You are blacklisted from the entire tech sector." Julian didn't hesitate for a single fraction of a second. He took a step forward, his expensive leather shoes stepping directly onto the crumpled $100 bills on the floor, crushing them into the spilled wine. "If you ever show your pathetic face in any Stark Nexus facility again, Elena," Julian hissed, his voice dropping into a low, vicious threat, "I will have my private security detail beat you and throw you into jail for corporate espionage. You are nothing but a zero, a nobody." I looked down at the shattered crystal glass on the floor. I looked at the red wine soaking into the server prototype, but my hands stopped shaking. A strange, terrifying glacial calm settled over my entire soul. The blindfold had been violently ripped off. For 3 years, I had quietly sat in the dark server rooms, completely writing the core source code, the revolutionary neural network algorithms, and the advanced quantum databases that built Stark Nexus into a $50 billion empire. I had given it all to Julian, letting him put his name on the patents, letting him take 100% of the public credit just to build his confidence because I thought I was sacrificing for our future marriage. What Julian Stark and Alyssa Mercer completely failed to realize, what their high-priced legal teams and deep background checks could never uncover because my identity was protected by national security protocols, was that the name Stark Nexus was built on my intellect. And even worse for them, my family's venture fund, the Croft Global Trust, was the silent entity that provided 90% of the seed capital for the company. I wasn't a helpless, low-level server maid. I was the secret co-founder and the primary financial shareholder, legally owning 51% of the absolute voting stock of the entire global corporation. Julian hadn't just fired a poor girl. He had just humiliated his ultimate boss. And tomorrow morning at the emergency board of directors meeting, I was going to strip him of his title, his fortune, and every single ounce of his stolen dignity. To truly understand why the sole creator of the world's most powerful artificial intelligence protocol ended up carrying a heavy wrench and wiping down dusty server racks, you have to understand the philosophy of my late father, Magnus Croft. He was old money tech royalty, a silent titan who built the global satellite communication grids that modern society relies on. He controlled shipping lines, banking infrastructure, and defense tech across 3 continents. But my father absolutely loathed the fake, flashy arrogance of the newly rich. He despised the corporate climbers who used technology not to advance humanity, but to feed their own pathetic egos. Before he passed away in his private medical suite in Switzerland, he placed an encrypted titanium flash drive into my hands. "Elena, my brilliant daughter," he had whispered, his eyes shining with deep, timeless wisdom. "True power is completely silent. The louder a man screams about his wealth, the more insecure his foundation truly is. Noise is for the weak, the temporary, and the fraudulent. I am leaving the entire 51% controlling share of the Croft Global Trust exclusively to you. But you must promise me one thing. Before you take the throne, work from the absolute bottom of the industry. Hide your name. Look at the true faces of the people when they think you have nothing. Find a man who loves your mind and your soul when you are wearing a grease-stained uniform, 'cause once the world knows you own the kingdom, you will only see masks of greed. So, I honored his final wish. I buried my true identity deep within the encrypted digital vaults of the Croft Trust. I applied for a low-level, entry-position hardware maintenance job at a tiny tech startup named Stark Tech under my mother's maiden name, Elena Ross. I rented a tiny, drafty apartment, drove a broken compact car, and ate cheap food. I wanted to build a real, honest life from scratch, relying on nothing but my own mind. And then, 3 years ago, I met Julian Stark. At the time, he was a brilliant but desperate programmer, drowning in debt, working out of a damp garage, trying to build a basic machine learning model. He was charming, intensely attentive, and possessed an aura of deep humility. He would stay up with me until 4 a.m, sharing a single cup of instant coffee, talking passionately about how he wanted to use technology to cure diseases and help the poor. I fell for it. I fell for every single beautifully engineered word, every fake smile, and every sweet promise. I thought I had found the rare, honest soul my father had told me to search for. When he proposed to me with a cheap, modest silver band on the roof of our garage office, I wept tears of absolute joy, believing I had found my true soulmate. But the moment I finished writing the Aegis Quantum Protocol, the revolutionary AI code that could predict global market trends with 99% accuracy, and the moment the Croft Trust quietly funneled $50 million of seed capital into the company under an anonymous investor name, the mask of the humble prince completely shattered. Julian was named CEO. The tiny startup transformed into Stark Nexus overnight, and with the billions came a grotesque, terrifying transformation. Julian stopped coming home to our apartment. He began treating me like an embarrassing servant in front of his new high society friends. He started wearing $5,000 custom suits, driving exotic sports cars he didn't know how to handle, and looking at my simple lifestyle with absolute disgust. "You need to face reality, Elena," Julian had snapped at me privately in his grand executive office one afternoon, slamming a folder down on his mahogany desk. "I am moving in the highest circles of global capital now. I am rubbing shoulders with governors, models, and billionaires. When you show up to the office wearing those dusty maintenance clothes, you are actively damaging my personal brand. If you can't match my status, you need to stay out of my sight and stay in the server room." I endured the emotional abuse for months, foolishly believing he was just stressed about the corporation's upcoming global IPO and the massive audit by the Mercer Venture Group. I never told him that I was the one pulling the strings behind his entire success. I had planned to wait until tomorrow morning's grand 5-year anniversary board meeting to officially reveal my identity to him as his ultimate wedding gift, giving him absolute financial security for life. What a naive, utterly blind girl I was. Julian didn't want a partner. He wanted a stepping stone. The moment Alyssa Mercer, the spoiled daughter of the billionaire fund manager, showed interest in his newly acquired wealth, Julian didn't hesitate for a single second to trade my 3 years of loyalty, love, and genius for a chance to marry into a prominent New York dynasty. They didn't see me as a human being. They saw me as a temporary tool to be used, crushed, and thrown out like garbage once they thought they had extracted all my value. But as I stood in the wet, wine-stained pavilion, watching Julian and Alyssa walk away into the cheering crowd of journalists, I felt a dangerous, powerful warmth spreading through my veins. The test was officially over. The simple girl was gone. And tomorrow morning, the true queen of Stark Nexus was coming to collect her crown, and she was going to tear their fraudulent paradise down to the ground. I walked out of the towering gilded entrance of the Mandarin Oriental, the heavy glass doors sealing away the echoing sounds of the high society gala behind me. The autumn New York air was freezing, and a sharp, icy rain began to pelt against my face, mixing with the stains of red wine still dripping from my heavy gray maintenance jacket. I stood alone on the wet concrete plaza, staring at my boots. Behind the massive, illuminated glass windows of the ballroom above, I could still see the faint, flashing silhouettes of the paparazzi cameras. Julian and Alyssa were probably standing on stage right now, holding hands, soaking in the admiration of the world's elite tech investors. They truly believed they had just successfully executed a flawless corporate execution. They thought they had permanently cleansed their multi-billion-dollar empire of a broke, nameless tech maid who mended their servers. I walked past the long, flashing rows of exotic sports cars and billionaire limousines parked in the VIP executive lot, moving straight toward the edge of the public sidewalk. I reached into the deep inner pocket of my utility jacket, bypassing my basic corporate security badge, and pulled out a custom, matte black encrypted satellite smartphone. I swiped across the dark interface, entering a military-grade biometric security sequence that bypassed the public cellular networks entirely, connecting directly to the sovereign mainframe of the Croft Global Trust. I dialed a direct, high-priority hotline. The phone did not even ring once. It was picked up instantly by a voice that radiated an immense, unyielding, and absolute financial authority. "Good evening, Ms. Croft," Alistair Kane said, his deep, gravelly voice instantly cutting through the sound of the New York traffic. "As the chief trustee of the Croft Global Trust and the ultimate overseer of my family's multi-billion-dollar assets, Alistair was a man whose legal signature could freeze entire international banking networks by morning. Our network security monitors just flagged that your entry-level hardware clearance at the Stark Nexus headquarters was abruptly revoked by a regional vice president. We have been waiting for this exact cryptographic signal for 3 long years, Elena. Is the social experiment officially over, boss?" "The trial is over, Alistair," I said, my voice completely stripped of the soft, quiet, submissive tone I used when Julian demanded I fix his office server racks. It was now a cold, calculating register, carrying the crushing, absolute weight of an empire. "I want a comprehensive, line-by-line financial and technical audit on Stark Nexus, specifically targeting the core development assets managed by CEO Julian Stark and the Mercer Venture Group. I want to know their exact financial exposure before the closing bell tomorrow." On the other end of the line, the rapid, heavy clacking of a high-security supercomputer keyboard echoed through the receiver as Alistair opened the encrypted digital vaults of the Croft mainframes. "Opening the Stark Nexus master file now, Ms. Croft," Alistair replied, his voice dropping into a lethal, professional register. The data is flashing bright red on my terminal, boss. Over the last 12 months, Julian Stark has quietly used the revolutionary Aegis Quantum Protocol, the very AI source code you wrote in that garage, as leverage to secure massive, unsecured personal lines of credit from international venture funds. He has purchased a $60 million mega yacht, a private jet, and a massive penthouse on Billionaire's Row. He has accumulated devastating personal debts under the fraudulent assumption that the Mercer Venture Group would officially approve a $20 billion cash injection at tomorrow morning's emergency board meeting. A dark, freezing smile slowly spread across my face as I watched the neon lights of the city reflect in the puddles of rain. And what about the Mercer family? What is Alyssa's father currently investing? The Mercer Group is completely walking into a trap of their own making, boss? Alistair chuckled dryly, a sound dripping with corporate contempt. They have quietly shorted rival tech stocks, putting over 90% of their liquid capital into Stark Nexus to monopolize the global AI market. But there is a massive, fatal flaw in their calculation. Their legal teams failed to notice Section 9 of the original seed capital charter. Julian Stark does not own the intellectual property rights to the Aegis Protocol. The master cryptographic encryption keys are legally held exclusively by the Croft Global Trust. Julian only possesses a temporary conditional developer license. Excellent, I whispered, my eyes narrowing as the final jaws of the legal trap locked perfectly into place. Alistair, hear my direct executive commands. I want you to initiate the immediate, absolute deauthorization protocol on Julian Stark's developer access keys. Do not issue an internal system warning. Do not grant a grace period. Lock him out of the root directory entirely. Furthermore, I want the Croft Global Trust to officially freeze the $50 million operational cash pool we anonymously funneled into their server grids. Consider it done, Ms. Croft, Alistair Kane replied, instantly, his tone thick with professional satisfaction. Our elite team of international corporate attorneys is already assembling the legal paperwork. Will you require a full executive escort for tomorrow morning's emergency board meeting? No, Alistair, I laughed softly, a dangerous, melodic sound that chilled the air around the plaza. My loving fiancé has gracefully threatened to have me beaten and thrown in jail if I ever step foot inside his building again. He thinks he is going to stand before the global press tomorrow morning to announce his grand merger and his engagement to Alyssa Mercer. I think it is the absolute perfect stage to show him what happens when you attempt to steal a kingdom from its rightful creator. Have the legal team standing directly outside the boardroom doors at exactly 9 a.m. The Croft Empire is at your command, boss. I hung up the phone, dropping it back into my pocket. At that exact moment, a sleek, armored matte black Maybach with pitch black tinted windows pulled up silently to the curb, completely bypassing the security guards who tried to wave it away. The rear door was thrown open from the inside by a private security operative dressed in a tailored black suit who bowed his head with absolute, unconditional reverence. I stepped inside the luxury vehicle, leaving my old grease-stained utility jacket sitting abandoned by the side of the road. The low-level server maid was officially dead. The primary shareholder had returned. The night before the grand reckoning, the atmosphere Inside my private penthouse suite at the top of the Croft Tower on Fifth Avenue was filled with a quiet, lethal preparation. The floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered a sweeping, panoramic view of the glittering New York skyline, a skyline that my family's wealth had shaped piece by piece over the last half-century. Sprawled across the massive white marble island in the center of the room were thousands of pages of encrypted financial ledgers, bank routing receipts, and private text message transcripts, all pulled directly from Julian Stark's personal computer network by our cybersecurity team. I sat quietly in a plush leather chair, wrapped in a simple black silk robe, sipping black coffee as I turned the pages one by one. The depth of Julian's betrayal was staggering. He hadn't just cheated on me with Alyssa Mercer. He had actively altered the digital signatures on the company's patent applications, systematically erasing my name from the history of the Aegis Quantum Protocol. He had signed secret agreements promising to fire the entire ground-level engineering crew, the very men and women who had worked with us in the cold server rooms, just to slash operational costs and show a fake artificial profit margin to impress Alyssa's billionaire father. He didn't just break a vow, I whispered into the silent room, my fingers tracing the outline of the cheap, modest silver engagement ring he had given me in that damp garage 3 years ago. A ring I now realized had been purchased using a cash advance on my own stolen research data. He tried to erase my entire existence. I stood up slowly, walking over to the grand walk-in dressing suite at the back of the penthouse. Hanging in the center of the room, under a sharp spotlight beam of light, was a pristine garment bag. I unzipped it, revealing the ultimate masterpiece of old money, quiet luxury. A custom-tailored, stark white executive pantsuit designed exclusively for me by a world-renowned fashion house in Paris. It carried no visible logos, no flashy branding, and no cheap sparkles. It was the epitome of pure, untouchable, generational power. A garment that commanded absolute obedience the moment it entered a room. Beside the suit sat a velvet box containing my late father's heritage timepiece, a rare platinum Patek Philippe watch with a deep sapphire face that matched my eyes perfectly. This wasn't jewelry worn by social media influencers or overnight tech millionaires. This was a piece of history that signified absolute sovereign control over global capital. I walked over to my secondary terminal, typing in a single command script. On the screen, a live diagnostic map of Stark Nexus's global server grid appeared. It was a massive network of bright green nodes handling billions of dollars in automated financial transactions every single second, all powered by my Aegis AI algorithm. I held my breath and pressed the enter key. Instantly, a deep, silent digital cascading effect began to ripple across the map. Line by line, the green nodes began to flicker, turning a violent, warning shade of crimson red. My script was quietly extracting the master encryption keys from the root directory. Without those keys, the artificial intelligence model couldn't learn, couldn't update, and couldn't process data. It was slowly becoming a useless, frozen piece of digital stone. Within the next 6 hours, as the markets opened, the entire $50 billion infrastructure of Stark Nexus would begin to experience a massive, uncontrollable system lag. The users would panic, the systems would crash, and Julian Stark would have absolutely no idea how to fix it, because he had never understood the code he had stolen from me. I walked back to the bedroom, staring out at the city lights. Tomorrow morning, Julian Stark would wake up in his multi-million-dollar penthouse, put on his expensive designer watch, and drive his exotic sports car to the corporate headquarters, completely convinced that he was about to become an untouchable titan of the global financial world. He would stand before the cameras, hand in hand with Alyssa Mercer, laughing about the poor tech maid they had thrown out into the mud the night before. They thought they had built an impregnable fortress of wealth and power on a foundation of lies, theft, and cruelty. They truly believed that because I chose to live simply and work quietly in the shadows of the server rooms, I was helpless against their high society connections. What a beautiful, utterly catastrophic mistake they had made. They didn't understand that the fortress they were trying to sell to the world was built on my land, powered by my code, and governed by my handwritten signature. I closed my eyes, a deep, glacial calm settling over my heart as I prepared for sleep. The hours were ticking away. The stage was set. The international journalists were assembling. And tomorrow morning, the true queen of Stark Nexus was coming to permanently evict the parasites from her empire. The next morning, the high-security international boardroom on the 100th floor of the Stark Nexus global headquarters was a pressure cooker of unimaginable corporate stakes. The massive oval table made of flawless, polished obsidian glass was surrounded by the 20 most powerful venture capitalists and tech directors in the world. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, the New York skyline was partially shrouded in fog, but inside, the room was blindingly bright under the cold white LED lights. Dozens of global financial journalists and television crews stood packed behind velvet ropes in the viewing gallery, their cameras ready to broadcast the historic $20 billion merger agreement between Stark Nexus and the Mercer Venture Group live to the international markets. Julian Stark stood at the grand digital podium at the head of the table, looking every bit like the young, untouchable tech messiah he dreamed of being. He wore a custom $5,000 Italian suit, his hair slicked back with perfection, and a smug, victorious smile plastered across his face. Beside him sat Alyssa Mercer, draped in a flashing white designer dress, her fingers covered in flawless diamonds. Her father, the legendary venture capital tycoon Marcus Mercer, sat proudly next to them, tapping his gold pen against the obsidian table. They were celebrating early. They truly believed that within the next 30 minutes, the master merger contracts would be signed, the global AI monopoly would be secured, and Julian would officially solidify his place among the world's elite billionaires. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, and our distinguished investors watching worldwide, Julian announced arrogantly, adjusting his diamond-accented cufflinks as he pointed his laser clicker at the massive digital screen. Today, Stark Nexus changes the course of human history. With the official integration of our proprietary Aegis quantum protocol, we are launching an automated financial model that controls over 40% of the microtransaction algorithms across Wall Street. Our systems are flawless. Our dominance is absolute. The board members murmured in deep approval, nodding their heads in awe. Alyssa Mercer clapped loudly from the front row, throwing a deeply possessive, adoring look at her fiancé. Julian beamed with pure, unadulterated pride. He was using my slides. He was presenting the exact, hyper-complex neural database that I had spent 3 grueling years writing from scratch in that damp garage while he slept. He had copied my master files, stripped my cryptographic signature from the digital code, put his own name on the patent applications, and was now taking the credit before the global tech empire. Suddenly, the heavy, reinforced titanium double doors of the boardroom were violently thrown open, the loud mechanical echo cutting straight through Julian's presentation. I walked into the room, flanked by Alistair Kane and a tight phalanx of 12 international corporate attorneys from the Croft Global Trust. The sudden, aggressive interruption caused every single billionaire director to gasp, turning their heads in absolute shock. "What is the meaning of this ridiculous disruption?" Marcus Mercer roared, standing up so fast his leather executive chair slammed into the reinforced wall. He pointed an angry, shaking finger at me. "Julian, who let this girl into a top-secret global board meeting? Security. Isn't this the incompetent server maid you fired last night for gross insubordination and ruining the VIP pavilion?" Julian gripped the edges of the digital podium, his knuckles turning a violent shade of purple as his face drained of color. "Yes, Mr. Mercer." "Elena, how dare you trespass here? You are committing a massive federal corporate crime. I told you last night that if you ever showed your pathetic face in my building again, I would have you thrown in jail. Security, execute emergency protocols. Drag this crazy woman out of my sight right now." I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. I walked slowly down the center of the boardroom, the heels of my designer shoes clicking rhythmically against the obsidian floor with a terrifying precision. I stopped directly in front of the projection screen, completely blocking his stolen presentation. "Your proprietary algorithms, Julian?" I asked, my voice dropping into a freezing melodic resonance that completely commanded the silent room. "That's funny, because if you look at the master system diagnostics right now, you will see that your empire is completely bleeding to death." Julian let out a desperate, forced laugh, trying to maintain his composure before the live television cameras. "You are completely insane, Elena. The Aegis protocol is running perfectly on our mainframes. You are nothing but a low-level hardware mechanic who cleans dust filters. You don't know a single thing about high-level artificial intelligence." "Then why is your core directory currently flashing a critical system failure, Julian?" I replied coldly, pointing my hand toward the massive digital display behind me. Right on cue, the bright green data streams on the screen abruptly froze. Within 2 seconds, a massive, violent cascading pattern of blood-red warning blocks erupted across the global server map. Deep, rhythmic sirens began to chime softly from the room's smart ceiling consoles. The automated transaction lines handling billions of dollars on Wall Street were dropping like stones. What is happening?" Marcus Mercer shouted, his gold pen slipping from his fingers. He lunged forward, staring at the flashing red screen. "Julian, fix this immediately. The financial markets are opening in exactly 10 minutes. If the Aegis algorithm is offline, our short positions will be completely wiped out by the opening bell." Julian panicked completely. He dropped his laser clicker and scrambled over to the master system terminal, his fingers flying wildly across the mechanical keyboard. Cold sweat began pouring down his pale face, soaking through his custom-tailored shirt collar. It's just a minor network lag, a basic hardware glitch. The code isn't responding to my administrator override commands. The main system is demanding a root cryptographic master key. I am typing in my encryption password, but the mainframe is rejecting my clearance. Of course it's rejecting your clearance, Julian, I said, stepping closer to his shaking terminal, my emerald green eyes locking onto his terrified face with an icy, unyielding dominance. Because you didn't write a single line of that code. You don't even know how to access the root directory. Last night, I executed the absolute deauthorization script. I extracted the master cryptographic encryption keys from the Aegis protocol. Without my mind, Julian, your $50 billion artificial intelligence model is nothing but a useless, frozen piece of digital stone. Julian's breath hitched, his chest heaving as his mind spun into a state of visceral terror. He stared at the screen, then looked up at me, his jaw hanging completely open as the horrifying truth began to dawn on him. He had spent 3 years taking credit for a genius he could never hope to replicate. Alyssa Mercer leaped out of her seat, her white couture dress rustling as her face twisted into an aristocratic wedgie. "Shut up, you lying peasant! How dare you insult my fiancé in front of the global board? My father's venture group owns the master credit lines of this entire corporation. We control the funding. Your pathetic words mean absolutely nothing on this floor. You are a zero, a nobody." "Your father's venture group owns absolutely nothing, Alyssa," Alistair Kane interrupted coldly, stepping forward with an immense aura of legal authority. He opened his heavy titanium briefcase, pulled out a massive, gold-stamped sovereign corporate ledger, and slammed it onto the obsidian glass table with a deafening thud that shook the water glasses. "And as of exactly 9 minutes ago, neither do any of you." The senior international board director from London, an older, legendary tech billionaire named Lord Sterling, frowned as he looked at the gold-stamped document Alistair Kane had just produced. He adjusted his reading glasses, his eyes scanning the first page of the legal ledger. Within 3 seconds, his face completely drained of all color. His hands began to shake violently, the paper rattling in his grip. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with absolute, breathless terror. He instantly pushed back his chair, standing up so fast it nearly toppled over, and bent his entire body into a deep, 90-degree bow from the waist. "Welcome, Chairman," Lord Sterling whispered, his aristocratic voice cracking with absolute reverence. We had no idea you were arriving in person today. Please, accept our humblest apologies for this catastrophic misunderstanding." Marcus Mercer froze, his mouth hanging wide open as he stared at his oldest investment partner. "Lord Sterling." "What in the name of God are you doing? Why are you bowing to a fired server maid? She is a nobody. Her name is Elena Ross." "Her name is Elena Croft," Lord Sterling shouted back, turning on Mercer with an explosion of pure corporate fury. "You utter catastrophic fools. She is the sole biological daughter and primary heir of Magnus Croft. The Croft Global Trust has just officially executed the Master Inheritance Protocols. This server maid you have been insulting for the last 12 hours legally owns 51% of the total controlling voting stock of the entire global multinational conglomerate. She is the primary shareholder. She owns this building. She owns your contracts. She owns your patents, and she owns your entire livelihoods." The boardroom erupted into absolute, terrifying chaos. The international directors scrambled out of their seats, running over to form a line, bowing deeply toward me, desperately throwing out apologies, trying to distance themselves from Julian Stark as fast as humanly possible. Julian felt his knees give out entirely. He collapsed backward, sliding down the side of the digital podium until he was sitting pathetically on the boardroom floor, staring up at my white executive suit as if he were looking at a literal executioner. The woman he had treated like a broke, nameless orphan, the woman he had humiliated and thrown into the rain just 24 hours ago, was the absolute master of his entire universe. "No!" Alyssa shrieked, clutching her diamond-covered head in absolute violent denial. "No, this is a lie. Father, do something. Stop this. We are the Mercer family. We run New York tech." "Not anymore, Alyssa," I said, looking down at her with a cold, pitying smile that cut deeper than any blade. I reached out, taking the master administrative console remote from the podium, and pressed the enter key with absolute finality. The bleeding red screen behind me changed instantly, wiping away the stolen presentation forever. In its place, a massive, red-bordered federal legal document appeared, detailing every single offshore account, fraudulent patent alteration, and illegal line of credit used by Julian Stark over the last 12 months. "Effective immediately," I announced, my voice carrying the absolute crushing weight of sovereign corporate authority. The Croft Global Trust has officially canceled the $20 billion merger with the Mercer Venture Group. Furthermore, I am executing Section 9 of the Corporate Seed Charter due to systemic material fraud, intellectual property theft, and corporate espionage. CEO Julian Stark is permanently, unconditionally terminated from Stark Nexus. Your assets are frozen. Your private jet is seized. Your security clearance is completely erased. You are officially nothing." Julian crawled forward on his hands and knees across the boardroom floor, crying, weeping, his expensive suit covered in his own sweat as he pathetically tried to grab the cuff of my white trousers. "Elena, please, I beg you. I was blind. I was stupid. I did it all for us. I still have the silver ring from the garage. We can get married today. I will be your loyal servant forever. Please don't destroy my life." I stepped back, completely evading his trembling, desperate hands, and looked at the 4 security operatives standing at the entrance. "Get this thief out of my boardroom," I commanded coldly. The grand obsidian glass boardroom of Stark Nexus fell into a suffocating, terrifying silence. The illusion of a $50 billion tech empire had completely dissolved, leaving nothing but the raw, bleeding reality of corporate ruin. Julian Stark remained collapsed on the polished floor, his custom Italian suit wrinkled and soaked in his own panicked sweat. He stared up at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The man who had stood at the digital podium just 10 minutes ago, commanding the attention of the global financial elite, looked like nothing more than a broken, terrified child. Beside him, Alyssa Mercer stood completely frozen. Her hands, heavy with multi-carat diamonds, were shaking so violently that her gold, champagne flute slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the obsidian table before shattering on the floor right next to Julian's face. She looked at her father, Marcus Mercer, whose face had aged 10 years in a matter of seconds. Suddenly, the heavy titanium doors of the boardroom swung open for the final time. The crowd of journalists in the viewing gallery rushed forward, their cameras flashing in a chaotic frenzy as 6 federal agents from the Securities and Exchange Commission, accompanied by 4 high-ranking FBI officers, marched into the room. They walked past the trembling board directors, past the weeping administrative assistants, and stopped directly behind Julian Stark and Marcus Mercer. Julian Stark and Marcus Mercer, the lead federal agent, announced, his voice echoing through the massive room with the cold, unyielding weight of federal law. He pulled out 2 red-stamped federal arrest warrants, holding them open before the live television cameras. You are officially under arrest for grand larceny, multi-billion-dollar wire fraud, predatory market manipulation, and the premeditated theft of classified defense-grade intellectual property belonging to the Croft Global Trust. Hands behind your backs, immediately. Julian went completely hysterical. He struggled like a wild, trapped animal as 2 massive federal officers grabbed his arms, hoisting him off the floor. His tailored jacket was violently torn at the shoulder, his slicked back hair falling across his face in messy, sweat-drenched strands. Elena, no! Save me! Tell them it was a corporate mistake! Julian shrieked, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched scream that echoed horribly down the executive hallway as the officers forced his hands into heavy steel handcuffs. You can't do this to me. I built this company. I am the face of Stark Nexus. Elena! I stood dead center in front of the flashing red server screens, my white executive suit radiating an untouchable, majestic power. I watched him with a freezing, absolute calm. I felt no anger. I felt no pity. I only felt a deep, chilling validation of my father's timeless wisdom. Alyssa Mercer lunged forward, her face twisted in a grotesque, aristocratic rage, her manicured nails clawing at Julian's face as the officers dragged him past her. You parasitic, lying fraud, Alyssa screamed, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated desperation as she realized her family's multi-billion-dollar fund was completely ruined. You stole that code. You lied to my father. You told us you were a once-in-a-generation genius. You ruined our dynasty. You are nothing but a broke, low-class grease monkey from a garage. Marcus Mercer offered absolutely no resistance. His eyes were hollow, staring at the floor in a catatonic state of shock as the steel clicked tightly around his wrists, his prestigious Wall Street legacy ending in total, irreversible, public humiliation. Within 90 seconds, the toxic parasites who had tried to erase my existence were violently dragged out of the room, their desperate screams fading into the mechanical hum of the elevator shafts. I turned slowly, my green eyes scanning the remaining 20 board directors. They were all standing at absolute attention, their bodies visibly trembling, their foreheads covered in sweat as they waited for my final judgment. They knew that with a single stroke of my pen, I could liquidate their entire stock portfolios and blacklist them from the tech industry forever. I walked over to the grand digital podium, stepping over the crumpled papers and broken glass Julian had left behind. I placed my hands on the obsidian edges, leaning forward slightly, as Alistair Kane handed me the master administrative microphone. Lord Sterling, I commanded, my voice resonating through the smart audio systems with a crushing, sovereign authority. Yes, Chairman Croft, the older billionaire replied, instantly, slamming his body into another deep, 90-degree bow. I want a complete, comprehensive corporate restructuring of this entire global conglomerate by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, I announced, my words slicing through the room like a razor. Julian's toxic policies are officially null and void. The secret agreements to terminate our ground-level engineering crew are permanently destroyed. I want every single server mechanic, hardware technician, and code specialist who worked with me in the dark rooms reinstated immediately. Their salaries are quadrupled effective immediately, and they will receive a 10% equity stake in the new corporate stock pool. We are restoring the integrity of this empire. This meeting is officially adjourned. The boardroom erupted into a wave of breathless relief as the directors bowed in unison, scurrying out of the room like mice escaping a burning castle. I stood alone in front of the massive glass windows, watching the New York fog slowly clear, revealing the bright golden morning sun shining over my city. The crown was finally back on the head of its rightful creator. 1 full year has passed since that fateful morning in the high-security boardroom of Stark Nexus. The global conglomerate is no longer a toxic battlefield of artificial greed and stolen credit. Under my direct supervision as chairman and chief architect, the company has completely transformed. We abolished the cruel, short-sighted policies of the past, investing billions into the welfare, education, and health care of the ground-level workers who keep our server grids breathing. The people who do the real honest work are finally treated like the royalty they are. I stood in my magnificent glass-walled office at the absolute summit of the Croft Sky Tower on 5th Avenue, wearing a simple, elegant, dark wool suit, holding a warm cup of black coffee. The warm afternoon sun was setting over the beautiful New York skyline, casting a golden, peaceful glow across my mahogany desk. Sitting in the center of the wood was a beautiful, completely restored silver frame holding the photograph of my late father, Magnus Croft. Alistair Kane walked into the suite quietly, stepping to my side and placing a secure, leather-bound financial report onto my desk. The annual federal judicial dispositions have just finalized, Chairman, Alistair said with a respectful, proud smile. I opened the file, reviewing the final updates on our legal ledger. Julian Stark and Marcus Mercer had been found guilty on all federal counts of corporate espionage, multi-billion-dollar fraud, and grand larceny. Julian was sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary with absolutely no chance of early parole. The legal report attached a recent photograph from the state prison database. The handsome, arrogant corporate climber who once bragged about his $5,000 suits and exotic sports cars was now completely bald, his face hollowed out by pure despair, wearing a coarse, faded gray inmate uniform. He spends 16 hours a day performing grueling, repetitive, hard labor in the prison's low-end industrial laundry facility, literally scrubbing dirt and grease out of uniforms for exactly 12 cents an hour. Money that is automatically deducted to pay back his massive personal debts to the Croft Trust. As for Alyssa Mercer, her family's multi-billion-dollar fund went into absolute catastrophic bankruptcy. Every single one of her diamonds, her designer dresses, and her family penthouses was repossessed by the state to pay back the investors they defrauded. Today, Stripped of her high society status, she works the grueling evening shift as a customer service complaints cashier at a local, low-end retail store. She spent her entire life looking down on the working class, and now, ironies of ironies, she survives entirely on the very minimum wage she once tried to destroy. I closed the file, looking out at the vast, beautiful horizon of the city. I felt a profound, beautiful peace in my soul. Julian and the Mercer family truly believed that because I chose to live humbly, work quietly in the dark server rooms, and protect the memory of my father, I was an easy target to be crushed, humiliated, and thrown into the rain. They forgot that the true titans of this world never make noise. They simply build the foundation. And when you attempt to steal the crown from a silent genius, she will let you climb to the very peak of your arrogance, just to watch you fall into an absolute, terrifying nothingness. Never mistake humility for weakness, because the quiet assistant fixing your computer today might just own the entire empire tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening to this story on Cold Calm Stories 1. If you believe that karma always delivers the absolute perfect justice, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dive dramatic tales. See you in the next story.